All right, buckle up, because today we're diving deep into the world of international trade. But, like, way more specific, we're talking about becoming an import-export manager. For machine tools, no less. Yeah, I know what you might be thinking. Machine tools. Isn't that a little niche? But trust me on this. This is a field that reaches every corner of the globe. Plus, we've got some seriously cool RoleCatcher resources to help us break it all down. So if you've ever thought about orchestrating the movement of these industrial giants across borders, stick around.
I'm with you there. There's a lot more to this career path than people realize.
Yeah, like what comes to mind?
Well, for starters, it's all about understanding these really complex global supply chains. Then you've got to navigate international regulations. Really, you're becoming a master of logistics, but on a global scale.
Okay, I'm hooked already. Let's unpack that whole master of logistics thing a bit. When we say import-export manager, what are we really talking about? Like, what do these folks actually do day to day?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And honestly, it goes way beyond just shipping stuff from point A to point B. Think of it more like being a cross-border business coordinator. That's a mouthful, I know.
Right.
But it's about being a conductor.
Okay.
You're conducting a global orchestra, right? But instead of instruments, you've got these machine tools.
I like where this is going.
And it's your job to make sure every single one is in the right place at the right time, totally in sync.
But like with the whole symphony of international regulations, too.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. So it's not just about the physical movement of goods. You're dealing with the legal and bureaucratic side of things, too.
100%. You're juggling internal teams, manufacturing, logistics, sales, you name it.
Yeah.
And then there are the external players, suppliers, customs officials, freight forwarders, and of course, you're the expert on all those international trade regulations that are constantly changing.
Whoa, that sounds like a lot to manage. I mean, it sounds incredibly dynamic, but also super demanding.
It definitely keeps you on your toes.
So who's cut out for a job like this? Who thrives in that kind of organized chaos?
Well, it takes a certain kind of person to really thrive in a role like this, that's for sure.
Like what? What are we talking about?
Well, on the one hand, there's the potential for high earnings.
Oh yeah, how high are we talking?
We're talking a median salary of around $90,000 per year, and that's just a start. Experienced managers can easily make over $120,000.
That's not bad at all.
Right. Plus, you've got the opportunity to travel, experience different cultures, and work in a field that's constantly evolving.
Okay, so no 2 days are the same.
You got it.
All right, so we've covered the exciting stuff. But what about the challenges? What's the other side of the coin? I imagine those international time zones can be a real pain.
Oh, you're not wrong about that. Those time zones are definitely a factor. But beyond that, there's a lot of pressure. You're carrying a lot of responsibility. Remember those international trade regulations we mentioned?
Oh, right, the symphony of regulations.
Exactly. And you really need to know them inside and out. Those regulations can change like the wind depending on the country. One example you absolutely have to understand, Incoterms.
Inco what now?
Incoterms.
Okay, break that down for me.
Basically, they're like the ground rules of international trade. International commercial terms, to be exact.
Okay.
They lay out all the responsibilities for buyers and sellers in international transactions. So they're kind of important.
I'm guessing so.
Really important. Things like who's paying for shipping, who's handling insurance, what about customs clearance. Incoterms spell it all out.
So messing those up could cause some serious headaches.
Let's just say a mistake there, and your entire operation could go haywire. And believe me, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are a lot of little intricacies you need to wrap your head around.
Okay, so maybe not for the faint of heart. But for someone who's up for a challenge, it sounds like it could be a seriously rewarding career.
I definitely think so.
So let's say someone is listening to this and thinking, okay, this import-export manager thing sounds pretty cool. Where do they even begin?
Well, one of the first things anyone interested in this field should do is learn about the industry.
Makes sense.
We're talking machine tools, which covers a pretty wide range of equipment.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Oh, we're talking lathes, milling machines, grinding machines, the works. These are the heavy hitters of manufacturing.
Seriously?
Oh, yeah. They're used to make everything from cars and airplanes to, like, smartphones and medical devices.
Wow, I had no idea the scope was that broad.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
So are you saying that even having a basic understanding of these machines and what they do is important?
It definitely wouldn't hurt. You don't need to become a machinist yourself. But understanding the language they use, the processes, the specific needs of the industry, that's really valuable.
It's like learning a bit of the language before you travel to a new country.
Exactly. It helps you navigate the landscape.
Okay, so learning the language of machine tools.
Now you're getting it.
What else?
Well, let's talk about the career path itself. RoleCatcher actually has some great insights into what a typical trajectory looks like for an import-export manager in machine tools.
Perfect. Let's dive in. What are some common starting points for someone who's brand new to this whole thing?
Well, you'll often see entry-level positions like import-export coordinator or logistics assistant. Those are all about really diving in, learning the ropes, building that solid foundation.
Okay, so those roles that might seem entry level, they're actually super valuable.
They're like boot camp for the world of international trade. You're
Mhm.
assisting with all the documentation, making sure everything's kosher with those customs regulations. You might even get your hands on some actual machine tool parts.
So instead of just reading about those Incoterms, you're putting them into action.
Exactly. And you're learning from the pros, the ones who've been there and done that.
That's a pretty sweet deal, actually.
Hmm.
RoleCatcher even had this sample profile, kind of like a day in the life of someone at this stage. They call them a detail-oriented multitasker who's passionate about global logistics. Does that sound about right to you?
100%. This is someone who lives for a fast-paced environment. They geek out over customs forms and shipping documents, and there's nothing more satisfying than making sure those shipments arrive on time and on budget.
They're like the Sherlock Holmes of shipping containers.
Yeah, right.
Probably got a map of global shipping routes memorized.
I wouldn't be surprised.
But okay, so that's step one. You're in the door.
Right.
What's next? How do you start climbing that career ladder?
Well, the next rung is usually import-export specialist.
Okay, what's different there?
No, you're not just assisting.
Right.
You're managing your own portfolio of import-export transactions. You're the one making sure everything lines up with those international trade regulations.
More responsibility, more autonomy.
Yep.
Probably a few more time zone headaches along the way.
Probably, yeah. But on the plus side, more opportunities to make a real impact.
True, true. So what does RoleCatcher say about the import-export specialist?
They highlighted someone who's proactive, a total problem solver, a master of efficiency.
They're the ones optimizing shipping routes, negotiating with suppliers, probably even predicting customs delays before they happen.
Exactly. They're thinking 10 steps ahead, always anticipating challenges, and finding those creative solutions to keep those machine tools moving.
They're like logistical ninjas.
Uh-huh, I like that.
Okay, so you've mastered the art of import-export. You're the specialist.
Right.
What's next? What's the next step up?
That's where those leadership skills really come into play. You could become an import-export supervisor.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So now you're leading a team of coordinators, you're mentoring more junior staff, you're making sure the whole operation runs like a well-oiled machine.
So it's not just about managing goods anymore. It's about managing people, too.
Exactly. And not just your team. You're building relationships with all the key players, suppliers, customers, even government authorities.
Sounds like being a smooth talker is helpful at this level.
Communication is key. RoleCatcher even included this quote from an import-export supervisor. They said, "In this business, it's all about building trust and understanding. You're not just negotiating contracts, you're building relationships."
Totally. It's like that saying, people do business with people they like and trust.
Exactly. And those relationships can really make or break you in international trade.
So true. Okay, so we've gone coordinator to specialist to supervisor,
Right.
and the stakes keep getting higher.
They do.
So what's the top of the mountain? What are you working towards?
For many people, it's ultimately becoming that import-export manager. You're overseeing every aspect of import-export for a company, making sure everything aligns with global trade regulations and company policies, the whole 9 yards.
This is it, the big leagues. You're the one calling the shots, setting the strategy, leading your team to international trade victory.
You could say that. But it's not just about climbing the ladder, you know.
I hear you.
RoleCatcher really emphasized the satisfaction of becoming a true expert in your field. And this is a field that's always changing, always growing, and it's vital to how the whole world works.
I like that. But becoming an expert doesn't just happen overnight, right? What does RoleCatcher recommend for someone who really wants to stand out, really excel in this field?
Well, continuous learning is key. I'm talking workshops, seminars, conferences, anything to stay ahead of the curve on those import-export regulations.
So you never really stop learning in this job.
Never. The world of international trade is constantly moving. New technologies, new regulations, new challenges popping up all the time. If you want to stay ahead of the game, you have to be a lifelong learner.
It's like that old saying, evolve or die, right?
Exactly. And that actually brings up another crucial aspect of success in this field, networking.
Okay, networking. So it's not just for salespeople.
Not at all.
How does it fit into import-export?
It's absolutely essential, honestly. Going to trade shows, industry conferences, joining those online forums, those are all gold mines for connecting with other people in the field.
I imagine it's a good way to stay updated on the latest trends, too.
Oh, absolutely. Plus, you never know when you might find your next big opportunity.
And swap some stories about those international trade hiccups along the way.
Uh-huh, exactly. The world of international trade is a lot smaller than you might think. Building a solid network of contacts, people you trust, people who've been there, that can open so many doors.
It sounds like it. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
The typical career path, how important continuous learning is, the power of networking. But I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, finding your niche.
Right.
Why is specialization so important in a field as broad as import-export, especially with something like machine tools?
Well, it's like this, the world of machine tools is huge.
Yeah.
And incredibly diverse. You've got everything from your basic lathes all the way to these crazy, sophisticated multi-axis machining centers, the kind they use in aerospace manufacturing. And each sector, aerospace, automotive, medical, they all have their own quirks, their own demands, regulations, even their own language,
So it's like speaking different dialects within the same language.
Exactly. And when you specialize in a particular niche, like really become an expert in one specific area of machine tools, that's how you get a leg up. You become fluent in that niche's language, inside and out. You understand all the regulations like the back of your hand, and you connect with the key players in that specific market.
So you become the go-to person
Exactly.
when everyone calls because you've got that deep knowledge and experience that nobody else does.
Exactly. Like, let's say you're really into renewable energy, right?
Okay, I like where this is going.
So you decide to focus on importing and exporting machine tools that are used to make wind turbines. You learn everything about those specific machines, the regulations, the logistics of getting them shipped internationally, everything. You become incredibly valuable to any company working in that sector.
You're not just a generalist, you're the wind turbine machine tool expert.
Exactly.
It's about finding that intersection of what you're passionate about and what the market needs.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Speaking of passion, RoleCatcher shared this really cool story about this young professional who did exactly that. He was obsessed with classic cars, right? So he ended up specializing in importing and exporting vintage machine tools,
Yeah.
the kind they use to restore those classic cars. He became a legend in the classic car world. Everyone knew him, everyone went to him because he was the guy for sourcing those impossible-to-find parts.
See? That's what I'm talking about. That's a perfect example of how finding your niche can totally make your career.
It's not just a job, it's about following your interests and making a real impact.
100%.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of import-export managers and machine tools, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
If you're even a little bit intrigued by international trade, don't be afraid to really dive into a niche that excites you. Become a master of your craft, build those relationships, and never ever stop learning. There are so many opportunities out there in global trade, especially if you're up for the challenge.
Beautifully said. It's not just a job, it's a dynamic, constantly evolving career path with global reach. That's all the time we have for today's deep dive, folks. We hope you learned something new. And as always, happy exploring.